Just try to picture this for a second, a direct vision right into the throne room of God. This is what a young woman named Ellen White saw, and she saw it during a time of huge spiritual crisis. And believe me, that vision and the movement it helped guide is right where our story kicks off.
So we're about to dive deep into a really pivotal moment in religious history. It's an incredible story about how a really crushing disappointment for thousands of people was completely transformed into a global mission, with the year 1844 sitting right at the heart of it all.
Okay, so here's the game plan. We're going to start with an ancient prophecy, then we'll follow the intense buildup to something they call the Midnight Cry. We'll feel the absolute gut punch of the disappointment that came next, but then we'll uncover how a brand new understanding of a heavenly sanctuary basically changed everything and launched a worldwide warning message.
All right, so where did all this even begin? Well, it all started with unlocking a very specific, time-sensitive prophecy from the book of Daniel.
It really all boils down to this one verse in Daniel. See, back in the early 19th century, believers used what's called the day-for-year principle. It's a way of interpreting prophecy where one day equals 1 year. So for them, 2,300 days wasn't literal days, it was 2,300 years. And they figured that the cleansing of the sanctuary had to mean the earth being purified by fire when Christ returned. So you might be asking, how in the world did they land on 1844? Well, the math started with this decree to restore Jerusalem back in 457 BC. If you count forward 2,300 years from there, you land squarely in 1844. As this idea took hold, this message just exploded globally. It became known as the first angel's message. The hour of God's judgment has come.
Now, as the year 1844 moved along, the excitement and the expectation just hit a fever pitch. This period of really intense anticipation, it became known as the Midnight Cry. But the exact date was still a bit of a moving target. At first, they thought it would be a spring event, but as they studied the ancient Jewish feasts more deeply, they had this aha moment. They saw this powerful connection. The earthly sanctuary was always cleansed on the Day of Atonement, which was on the 10th day of the 7th Jewish month. So they thought, well, the great heavenly event must happen on that same symbolic day. And this verse right here from the parable of the 10 virgins, it became their rallying cry. It just swept through the movement like wildfire. People said it had an irresistible power. It wasn't about arguing or debating anymore. It was this deep, heartfelt conviction that brought thousands together for one final, passionate period of preparation. And that's the date they landed on. The 10th day of the 7th month on the Jewish calendar lined up with October 22nd, 1844. For thousands of believers, this was it. This was the day their Savior was going to return in the clouds of heaven. I mean, can you even imagine the hope, the absolute certainty they felt? But as we now know, all of that hope was about to run head-on into a major, major crisis. They waited all day. They'd prayed. Many of them had literally sold their farms. They'd quit their jobs. They'd settled all their affairs. But the sun went down on October 22nd, and the sky stayed empty. The incredible joy just turned to shock, and that shock turned into what we now call the Great Disappointment. This was the question that just shattered them. Were we completely wrong? Did God lead us all this way just for it to be some kind of massive, cruel joke? I mean, everything they believed was suddenly on the table, in serious doubt. But right in the middle of all that bitter confusion, a new idea, a new light began to break through. They started to realize maybe the problem wasn't the prophecy or the date. Maybe the problem was how they understood the event itself. The key was focusing on the sanctuary in a new way. The Bible talks about the old earthly sanctuary as just a pattern or a shadow of the real one in heaven. And just like the earthly priest's work had 2 phases, they realized Christ's work in heaven must have 2 phases too. So the date, October 22nd, 1844, wasn't wrong. It just marked the beginning of a new, final phase of Christ's work, not on earth, but in the heavenly sanctuary. And this is where that vision we talked about at the very beginning becomes so critical. It served as a confirmation of this new understanding. People with visionary experiences saw that on that exact day, Jesus, our high priest, had moved from one part of the heavenly sanctuary, the holy place, into the most holy place. The big event wasn't his return to earth, but a hugely important transition in his work up in heaven.
This final part of his ministry came to be known as the investigative judgment. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's understood as a process that started in 1844, where the lives of everyone who has ever claimed to follow God are reviewed in heaven to see who has a genuine saving relationship with him before he comes back.
You know, the Bible actually gives us a great picture of this. Think about the parable of the wedding feast. The king comes in to check on the guests before the party officially starts, right? He's making sure everyone is dressed for the occasion. That inspection of character before the big celebration, that was seen as a perfect illustration of the work that started in heaven in 1844.
So, this new understanding of what Christ was doing in heaven, it didn't just solve a crisis for them. No way. It actually lit a fire under them for a renewed mission, a final urgent warning message for the whole world. Remember that first angel's message they'd already been preaching? Well, now it had a much deeper meaning. The announcement that the hour of his judgment is come wasn't just a general statement anymore. They now understood it pointed specifically to the start of this investigative judgment in 1844.
And that leads right into the second angel's message. This was proclaimed in the summer of 1844, and it declared that Babylon is fallen. In this new light, Babylon wasn't a city. It was understood as the churches and religious systems that heard this new truth about the sanctuary and rejected it, turning away from what these believers saw as God's unfolding truth. And then finally, the third angel's message comes right after, tying it all together into a complete three-part warning. It's a serious caution against false worship, and it identifies God's true people in this time of judgment as the ones who patiently endure by keeping all of God's commandments and holding on tight to their faith in Jesus. So let's zoom out. Where does this whole 1844 event fit into the grand sweep of salvation history? Well, it's seen as the start of the final work that leads up to the second of three huge "it is finished" moments. Here's the big picture. The first "it is finished" was at the cross. Christ's sacrifice was done, complete. The second one is still future. It'll happen when his work as our high priest in heaven is over and every person's eternal destiny is sealed for good. And the final "it is finished" is when God makes everything new and sin is gone forever. The whole 1844 event is what kicked off that heavenly ministry, leading to that second great declaration. And when you get right down to it, this story from the 19th century asks a really personal question for you and me today. If that final phase of heavenly work is still going on right now, it kind of forces us to ask ourselves, what does it really mean to be ready for the moment when that work is finally and forever finished?